Hey everybody, welcome live to the Jim Masters Show, live entertainment, lifestyle, celebrity talk show series. Hope you guys are doing well. I'm your host, Jim Masters, and it's a real pleasure to have you here. And we are going to be talking about a legendary group that has been beloved for years. They've had their ups and downs, of course, through the years when they were together. But of course, they've left us with a legacy, a lifetime of incredible hits and extraordinary music. We're talking about the Mamas and the Papas. Yes, legendary group. And we've had an opportunity. Matter of fact, I had an opportunity to meet one of them. It was at a very special event. Michelle Phillips herself. Yes. What were some things that surprised you about the group and about just some of the things you've uncovered along the way? Because your research was really extensive.
Yeah, a lot of surprises in there, beginning with how volatile things were really almost from the beginning, because right as they signed the deal with Dunhill Records, then it came to light that, Denny and Michelle had a thing going on. It wasn't really, I wouldn't call it an affair. There was a lot of heavy flirting there, and then it led to kind of a one-night stand. And it could have progressed until John Phillips found out about it and just kind of blew up. And this is really like less than a month after they had signed to Dunhill Records. It was just volatile from the beginning. Cass became mad at Michelle, and then Denny had unrequited love, wanted to just leave the group and run off with Michelle, and that just wasn't happening. So just how it really almost failed from the beginning. How the Monterey Pop Festival came together was really eye-opening, just to see how that all played out, from the Sunset Strip riots in late 1966, where there was a curfew put on teenagers for an underage club called Pandora's Box, which eventually led to a couple people approaching John Phillips about doing a pop festival, and how he just really kind of took that over. Those were some good surprises. And even within that story, how he really courted the groups from San Francisco, because there was kind of a musical revolution going on up there with the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Quicksilver Messenger Service and Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company, and just his just how he went out over and above to try to get them, and how really difficult that was.
Mm. A lot of times when those things happen, it surprises everybody, especially the listeners, the fans, because the amount of music that they put out, you would think it went on for like 30 years, but it really was in a very tight window, a very short time period, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't uncommon back in those days. I mean, artists tended to put out more than one album a year. I mean, look at the Beatles, and 64 to 66, they were cranking out product left and right. And I mean, if you go even to the country field, like George Jones, he's every year is like littered with albums, and that was the thing, is it was recording and touring, and that's just kind of the way it was. The labels really kind of controlled everything, and it wasn't really until the late 60s and early 70s that artists started to get control, get creative freedom, and pull back on those demanding schedules. And yeah, the Mamas and the Papas, they weren't, I wouldn't say they were as prolific as like the Beatles and the Stones, but they cranked out a fair amount of stuff in 2.5-3 year period.
Now, there's stories that say, and you talk about this, where John didn't necessarily want Cass Elliot to be a part of the group, not really because of the voice, but because of the weight issues, huh?
Right. Yeah. And John, when he was kind of transitioning from folk into folk rock, it was a slow transition. Denny was really trying to bring him along, because John wanted to keep doing folk music even after the Beatles came and everybody was starting to go electric, and electrified folk music, which was which was folk rock. It was rock and roll, and he was really resistant to that. And he had an image in his mind of doing like a Peter, Paul, and Mary kind of thing, and he wanted a trio. and it was him. He was the creative force, and then Michelle was the pretty girl singer, and then Denny was the handsome tenor, and there wasn't a room for a fourth person. And even though Cass made them sound better on the chances she did get to sing with them, when they had taken a trip to the Virgin Islands in early the spring of 1965 that went through the summer. This was before they were famous. John had stashed away a whole bunch of money from his folk days touring with the Journeymen and the New Journeymen, and they went off to the Virgin Islands, and Cass eventually followed them there, and she would sing with them at this little club that they played at a little bit. It was called Duffy's. And it's mentioned in the song Creaky Alley, and that tells their story. And she sang there with him off and on. John never invited her up on the stage, but she would wait tables or stand to the side of the stage and sing along. And to everybody else, it was obvious how much she fit in and how much better she made everybody sound. But John was just kind of steadfast. He didn't. Yeah, the weight thing was an issue. Her looks were an issue. She wasn't pretty by his standards, or he didn't think she was pretty by musical standards, and really didn't want her in there. And it wasn't until they went to California later that year, after coming back from the Virgin Islands, where they had where they went out to just like John bought into folk rock after hearing Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds, and they drove out there after getting home and started auditioning for a couple labels, and Cass would be with them for one reason or other. She would drive them or accompany them, and all the people liked the look of the four of them. And then when she sang, it was just like a no-brainer. It's like, man, you got to have her in there. We don't want the three of you. We want the four of you. And then when Lou Adler, said the same thing, John was really kind of backed into a corner, had no choice. And I think even then he realized, yeah, she'll probably be good for us.
So the dynamics of the relationships amongst the four of them were quite interesting. A lot of intermingling on many levels. How much do you think that really got in the way of the music, interfered? How much did you think people knew about during the time? Or would, in this case, reading the book be a revelation to a lot of people, maybe even tried and true super fans?
The feedback I get from a lot of people is that they didn't realize how poorly John treated Cass. That seems to be a lot of coming back. I don't think people knew it at the time. They were pretty good. The record labels and the people that surrounded them to go on were pretty good at masking all that stuff and making everybody seem like one great big happy family. Within the group, it was definitely a hindrance because it kept them from touring, because there was always infighting. John was mad at Denny and Michelle, or Cass was mad at Denny and Michelle, or and Cass was mad at John was mad at. So they really only toured, maybe played 50 live dates in their 3 years together, and really no audio outside of the Monterey Pop Festival of them singing live even exists, which is a shame. It did a number on them. I think they didn't really put the work in. I always say they kind of got rested on their laurels, really, as soon as it was a mixture of resting on their laurels and just the dysfunction within the band, because I know the record company really wanted them to go out. Dunhill, Jay Lasker at Dunhill and Lou Adler were always telling him, you got to go out and tour, because that's how that's how people, you got to go meet your audience. And that's how groups like the Beatles and the Stones and the Byrds and several others became the legends that they were, because they worked relentlessly. They were always in the studio. They were always, and when they weren't in the studio, they were touring or doing TV appearances or going on the radio. And the Mamas and the Papas just didn't really do that. It's just really a handful of moments of them doing that.
Who did it a lot, or as far as the public appearances, and so well, they can actually see clips of it on, the internet, was Cass Elliot, going on Murph, going on Carson, going on so many of those talk shows, and having some absolutely spectacular and humorous conversations with people of the likes of a Johnny Carson and those folks, even years after, they broke up, still doing that. And then I think I saw her again on the internet on some Julie Andrews Christmas specials, and she
Mhm.
was really as a solo performer as well, had a name, and her star was rising even further, of course cut way too short, but she was really a personality, an actress, an entertainer, as much as she was the great voice, huh?
Yeah, oh, very much so. In fact, I think had she lived, that probably would have been her next thing. I really think she could have been the first. Well, I guess Dinah Shore was probably a talk show host, but a really successful female talk show host, because she really had the gift of gab and she was entertaining. She was a triple threat. She could sing, she could act, and she could, well, she could dance too. But she could also host it. I guess a quadruple threat, you could say. And
Did they ever find that a threat too, because she was so personable?
Oh, I think so for sure. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think she even filled in for Carson a few times, and in the early '70s. So, yeah, I think that because it's funny because her solo career, I don't think it took off the way they had anticipated. She came really bursting out of the gates with "Dream a Little Dream," which I mean, and that was really a Mamas and the Papas song because John played on it, and Denny and Michelle sang on it, and he did as well, and it was it was from their fourth LP. But when Dunhill Records saw that there was going to be no product coming from the Mamas and the Papas because they just really had gotten to a really bad place, that they just went ahead with let's go with Mama Cass. She's the one. She's the star, and she did have some hits. I know "Make Your Own Kind of Music" is really kind of making the rounds on TikTok these days, and she did "It's Getting Better," and she had a few others, and she had a really good album with Dave Mason, but it just wasn't going. The hits weren't coming like they thought, but she was really, her star on television was rising, and she was always on Mike Douglas. She was on the Tonight Show a lot. She did the show with John Davidson and like all those ones that you mentioned. And had this really effervescent personality. I mean, she's always bringing her mother. Her mother was always in the audience. They would point her out, and it's just everybody she talked to was like an old friend, and I really think had she lived, that would have been the direction she would have eventually gone in full time.
So what was the process like as far as being able to connect with everybody and conduct these interviews and almost embed yourself in all of it? What was that like? It had to be an arduous process, just even getting the information, the contact information, just to put it all together.
I wouldn't say it was arduous. I was under no pressure when I didn't have an agent. I was unsigned to a publishing company. So I just I'll just write this on my own. And, having experience as a producer in radio for a dozen years, reaching out to people, cold calling is not intimidating to me. I was able to find email addresses and phone numbers, and I would just call. And I got in touch with Dick Wiseman, who played with John and Scott McKenzie and the Journeyman in the early '60s, and he's still around. He's like an encyclopedia on John Phillips. And
yes,
I talked with Pat LaCroix, who was in the Halifax 3 with Denny in the early '60s, and I got in touch with Jill Gibson, who in the summer of '66 replaced Michelle for a couple months when John kicked her out after it came to light she was having an affair with Gene Clark, who had been in the Byrds, and just a few, Steve Barry McGuire. Just people are. It's amazing. The internet is an amazing thing. I don't know if I could have written this like 30 years ago.
Without the resources. And you had to go through a lot of microfilm and microfiche. I remember that in college for reports. Oh my God, there would be hours of copying and sifting through, right?
And there's no email addresses. I'm working on a book now, and I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm just trying to find people, and I found a few email addresses, and you just drop them a line, and some people get back to you, and some don't.
Have you had a chance to chat with Michelle Phillips at all? Has there been any response to the book from her or her camp?
No, I haven't. I'm sure she knows by now that it's out there, and I hope she appreciates it. I think it's a pretty fair assessment of the group. It's really, I really think book tells the story of the music industry of the 1950s through the early 1970s, and really through the eyes of the mamas and the papas. It's really kind of a tribute to them. Obviously I'm critical of things here and there, but it's not, I don't make the book about my criticism. I really just try to tell their story, and just to and really kind of tell it in real time. Like I'm trying to put people back in that moment. And I'm not talking about what came 30 years later. I'm talking about what happened in 1965, 1966, 67, whatever year you want to pick that's involved in that story. And if she reads it, I hope she appreciates that. But have not heard from them, or really, and I have, Jeffrey Phillips dropped me a line. He's John's oldest son, and I had talked to him when I was writing the book, and he was very congratulatory. But as far as them, that's the only one from the family I've talked to.
Or Mackenzie or any of the other folks.
Right. Yeah. Haven't heard from any of them either.
So maybe they'll see this, and they'll have an opportunity to read it and enjoy it. It really is a page turner, and you don't even have to be super fans of the mamas and the papas to just appreciate the time period, what it takes to actually be in a group, and all the different personalities. Each one of them had distinct, unique personalities, and of course, that decision regarding Michelle and then bringing somebody else. Tell us about what that process was like.
When they replaced Michelle with Jill, it was very dramatic. It came to light. I'm sure John probably, John and Michelle had kind of split up after the whole Denny thing. John and Denny moved in together, and Michelle lived alone in the house that John and she had been renting. And she started seeing Jean Clark, and John had started seeing a woman named Ann Marshall. She was kind of a socialite, and they still played and toured together, and they were doing a performance at Melodyland with. Which was kind of like right near Disneyland in Los Angeles, and they were the marquee act, and Simon and Garfunkel were opening up for them, and Jean Clark came to see them, and Michelle was, and he sat like right front and center. Whoever set him up with tickets got him tickets right front and center. He's wearing this bright red shirt. And Michelle was kind of freaking out in the beginning, but, everything nobody noticed, and things were going great. And, eventually John noticed her like singing towards him very lovingly and passionately. And he flipped out mid concert. And when it was over, he chased her out the back and fired her. And, just like that. But, it took more than that. So after a couple of days, he, had spoken to Lou and Lou Adler, their producer. And the one of the owners of Dunhill. And so, he said, I need her gone. And he talked to Ben, like, I can't, it's either her or me. I can't focus with her here under these circumstances. So they agreed to fire her, and they drafted a formal letter, and the record company, their attorneys sent it to her. They mailed it to her. And she received it in the mail. And then, she confronted them all in the studio with it a few days after she got the letter. And it's one of the titles of my chapters where as she was leaving and being escorted out, she turned and said, "I'll bury you all," which, really kind of turned out to be true. But I don't think that's what she was thinking at the time. And, it took some healing. They brought in Jill. Jill was Jill Gibson. She was dating Lou. She had been she was Jan Barry's girlfriend of Jan and Dean for several years. And that's how she got to know all of them, know Lou and the people there. And she was kind of a natural replacement. She was a tall, pretty blonde former model. and she, she could write and she could sing. She had written songs with Jan and Dean, and had one of their hits, "You Really Know How to Hurt a Guy," was co-written by her, and she released a single that was produced by Jan. So she was kind of a natural replacement, and she jumped right in. I wouldn't say she jumped right in. There was a little cajoling involved in getting her to agree to it, because she really didn't want to get in the middle of John and Michelle's squabble. But they were desperate. They needed somebody, and they brought her in, and it went well. But the Mamas and the Papas is more than just four singing. It's just not four parts. You can't just like take one and replace it with, take one part and replace it. It's not like the Association or a group like that, we're a bunch of no names. The Mamas and the Papas was really a shared experience by those four individuals. And, Jill just wasn't in that group. She didn't go to the Virgin Islands with them. She wasn't in folk groups with them. She didn't experience the whole audition process and, being poor with them, So after a while, I think John's heart softened a little bit, and they could see, well, Jill's just not working out. Let's bring Michelle back in.
Which is an interesting decision, right? To do that. And how do you think the fans responded? Were they excited?
I think, when this all happened, the Mamas and the Papas were a fairly new group. So I don't know how well the fans were familiar with them. But I do know there was, and I tell the story in the book when John introduced Mama Jill at a show in, I think it was in, I don't even remember exactly where it was. Might have been in Forest Hills, New York. They just kind of rebelled. They're like, "What? Where's Michelle? Who's Mama Jill?" And I don't know how that played out for the rest of the tour, or if John went back to introducing her as Mama Jill. Maybe he just kind of skipped over that part. It's hard to tell because there's no audio from those concerts to listen to. I do know there were some instances of blowback from fans, but like I said, they were still kind of a new group, very, very fresh, maybe not even out 6 months, when that happened. So I don't think they got too much blowback.
I had the real distinct honor and pleasure through my work on many years still on PBS, and to interview Peter Yarrow and the late Mary Travers. And Mary was such a hoot and so funny and so real. All of them, Peter, Paul, Stuckey, of course. It's really interesting to learn that John really wanted to sort of mirror with the Mamas and Papas, Peter, Paul, and Mary. That was sort of like his inspiration or his vision, is to have them sort of be kind of like, and maybe experience the successes of the Peter, Paul, and Mary, right?
Yeah, and it makes sense because, after the Beatles came and really eviscerated the folk scene and all the young up-and-comers, Peter, Paul, and Mary kind of survived it. They were still pretty hip. They were still cranking out hits and were very popular, especially among, young people, or, the folk lovers or pop music lovers, left-leaning people, progressives, even if you want to use those terms. In fact, they even kind of did a tribute to the Mamas and the Papas, and I Dig Rock and Roll Music in the beginning, and they sounded a lot like the Mamas and the Papas. A lot of people confuse that; they think that's actually a Mamas and the Papas song because the opening verse is a tribute to them. But yeah, it makes total sense to me because I think John was interested in carrying on with folk music, and Peter, Paul, and Mary were still at that point the flag bearers, the standard bearers. As they kept going along, even in the face of the competition from the Beatles and the British invasion.
Let's talk also about your background. I'm a radio guy and a broadcaster and a TV guy as well. And how did you get into radio initially as a producer?
Well, after college, I went into sales and I wasn't very good at it. I did learn cold calling, which you kind of need the cold calling techniques, which you need as a producer. But after I got fired from one sales job, I had always had a love for radio, and it was always in the back of my mind. not sure what I wanted to do in it, if I wanted to be on the host end or the producer end. But I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
Oh yeah.
Which was up. I think they're still around in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I went there and I got an internship with WDHA in New Jersey, and then another one after that with SiriusXM. And I've been at SiriusXM ever since. That was 2007, and I started off on the Road Dogg Trucking channel, also on Jamie Foxx's channel, The Foxhole, and Raw Dog Comedy, and then when an opening for the Catholic channel came in, I got notified for it. I was producing an overnight show, and I had a young family. They're not so young anymore, but but at the time they were. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, it'd be nice to see my family again. Plus, I'm Catholic, and I have an interest in the faith. So I had let my boss know, hey, if there's ever any openings, let me know. And I'd like to work in the daylight again. And finally, one did come open, and I went there and stayed with that show for about a year, and I moved into the Catholic Channel's morning show in about October 2012, and have been there ever since.
That's cool, huh? That's really fantastic. So you're enjoying that. You also said you're working on another book as we speak.
I am. I am in the research and development phase of a book on Waylon Jennings, the country music superstar. Yeah, there've been a handful of books here and there, but I'm kind of nothing that really goes in depth on his early years. He had been, he in the mid 70s, he kind of became a household name, but he had been recording since about 1959. Yes. So there's, his whole 1960s and 1970s, it gets talked about in his book and in others, but really nothing in depth. And I'm a big fan of origin stories and peeling back the layers. And as with the Mamas and the Papas, there was really no comprehensive book that just really delve deep into every part of their story. And that's kind of what I want to do with Waylon. I want to, go back in the Buddy Holly years, and then what the aftermath of that, and him developing into a country singer. And then eventually, a recording artist for RCA, and then a superstar. That's kind of what I want to shine a light on a little bit.
So is this a genre you think that is sort of morphing for you, where you are sharing the stories behind the scenes of some of the most iconic people? And is it pretty much positioned in the direction of just music, or do you also see yourself tapping into other areas of celebrity and entertainment, of life in general?
I think I could see me doing that. Right now, it's just kind of music. That's kind of my thing. That's my interest. And those eras are really, 50s, 60s, 70s. That's really my strong suit. I would like to do a book on Wolfman Jack. He was a DJ. It's still music, but it's radio. It's not him. He's not a singer. He's a celebrity DJ.
But an iconic figure, and nobody else like him.
Right, and he had what he had really going for him, and there were DJs out there in that same era who matched his intensity and his love and his passion. But the thing that he had going for him was this big mystery. He would broadcast out of he would record his shows in Los Angeles and then bus them over to Baja California, over the border to XERB, which a 250,000 watt station, which was illegal in the United States. It wasn't illegal in Mexico. So he was kind of like SiriusXM, he was just like kind of like all over the country, and nobody knew what he looked like. I don't know if you ever seen the movie American Graffiti, but they're in that movie. He is the DJ of that movie. It's set in 1962, and that's what everybody's listening to. And he's a mystery. Nobody knows what he's looked like. They don't know if he's a white guy, if he's black guy, if he's Hispanic, and or where he broadcasted from. If people tell you he's broadcasted from an airplane, So in my mind, that makes him the best DJ of that era, because he had that element, that mysterious element And he wasn't bound by the restrictions of a lot of American radio stations. He would talk over songs, and payola wasn't illegal in Mexico, so he could do that.
And for those watching who don't know what payola is, that's where basically they would pay the radio stations or the DJs to air the music, which is something that in the broadcast world may happen in other areas of life. Hey, I'll pay you. Can you show this? But then in order to do that, you got to buy an ad or something. But
$100 handshake.
The Stations Commission always has frowned on doing that.
Right.
Exactly. And a lot of that went on back then too, which is really amazing. That would be great. Wolfman Jack, to do something on him. I'm trying to think, is anybody, one of my favorites, just as a broadcast host myself, on television and radio all these years, I've always enjoyed also Dick Clark. And because he was a guy that, of course, Ryan Seacrest very much patterned himself after Clark. Merv Griffin too. He had a wonderful friendship with Merv Griffin. So Ryan, very lucky, being groomed by Griffin, by legendary Dick Clark, and taking over some of the things over the years as well. I'm trying to think of there's ever been a definitive book on Dick Clark in recent years.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think so. I should put that on my list. And speaking, he was accused of payola, and I think he got away with it there for a little bit because he was doing movies and television. I saw him on an episode of an old Perry Mason television show a few days ago. So, but yeah, he was a young, handsome guy, and he was very likable on the air, and I know he did testify in front of the Senate hearing on payola in the late 1950s. But yeah, I don't know that there's been a book on him. That's a good one. I should look into that.
That would be really, really fascinating. What are some other things that you learned in telling this tale? And really, again, we really appreciate, and congratulations, because this is your first book, right?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
Well, yeah, there's so many things, I'm trying to think of, you learn a lot, I think the folk music thing was really interesting, and learning, I got to speak with two guys. I'd mentioned them before, Dick Wiseman and Pat LaCroix, and they really painted a great picture of the folk scene for me, which, there are less and less people from that era to talk to about, and it's getting lesser every day, it seems. And just to describe the tours they went on, and the things they encountered, a lot of the tours they did, they were attached to these, what they call hootenanny tours. There was a television show, speaking of Dick Clark, there was a television show in the early 60s called Hootenanny that really kind of capitalized on the folk boom. And it was like American Bandstand for folk groups. And they would go to college campuses and film the show on college campuses. And then they would do subsequent tours, kind of like Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars. And, so that's really how John and Denny came together, because the Halifax Three and the Journeymen were on a tour together, and they rode the buses together. So to see how their friendship formed, was very interesting, because, Denny and John grew close because, they both like to smoke grass and they would go sneak off and go into the bushes when they would go to rest stops and light up a joint. And that's really kind of how they grew closer together. And, they would go through the American South in the early 1960s, which was very volatile as far as the civil rights movement was concerned. And they often got mistaken for freedom riders. Freedom riders were civil rights advocates from the North who came down on the bus to try to help African Americans register to vote and do other things, without any interference from the local authorities or the local townspeople, who would give them a hard time with that. And they were often mistaken for that, and would encounter violence on the road or at tour stops, and would have to cancel things. And just to know that they were all a part of that, and they were all actually touring together when JFK was assassinated, it was a very tumultuous time for all of them. I know Michelle subsequently at the same time, John and Michelle had their first rough patch in their very short marriage. They were only married a year at that time, and she had already started having an affair. So it's just, when the dysfunction between John and Michelle is quite eye opening. Two people probably never meant to be married, quite honestly. But for us, we're glad they were, because we really, without John and Michelle's marriage, you don't have the Mamas and the Papas.
Yeah, exactly. When you look at Cass Elliot, obviously, we mentioned earlier, quite the entertainer, quite the actress, quite the spirited individual. If Cass Elliot had never been a part of the Mamas and the Papas, where do you think they would have gone if she had just never been a part of that group?
I don't think they would have gone anywhere, quite frankly. There's recordings of them out there, demos that John had made, and like a public service announcement. You can find it on YouTube for I forget what it's some organization. I don't remember what it's for. And they sing, and they sound pleasant, but it's not very good. It's the new Journeyman. It's really Denny and Michelle. Michelle could harmonize well in certain octave ranges, but I think when she sang lower, she tended to warble a little bit, and she's not really a singer. She'll admit that right off the bat. In her book, I'm not a singer, but she can. With John, one thing that John Phillips was able to do, and he did this with every group he'd ever been in. He could find I don't know how well you sing, but I'm not a very good singer. But he could take. Right. He could take you and me and a third person and make us sound good. He could find our strength.
Yeah.
That was what his strength was. And then when he got somebody like a Cass Elliot or a Denny Doherty or even Scott McKenzie with the Journeyman, that's like working with gold, like with spun gold. And just having that's one reason why he was. I liken him a lot to Brian Wilson as far as arranging songs is concerned. He certainly wasn't as prolific as Brian Wilson, but he was really on the same level as far as musicality and arranging songs, and that was his strong suit. But I think without somebody like Cass, I think they might. John was talented enough. And he had a line of, he was a really good salesman. He could really sell himself and could really spin a yarn of BS for people. And it probably would have gotten them signed, but I don't think we would be talking about him, the way we are, which might have been good for him personally. But professionally, I don't think we would be talking about him in the way that we are now.
Did it at all give you an appreciation for other groups, for the time period, for, the genre of music? Were there any other residual effects for you personally as the author, as the researcher, that you garnered and have taken away from the whole experience of writing and sharing this book, Scott? Well,
like I said, I put myself in the moment as best as I could. I always tell my wife, like, I love that era so much. I can't build a time machine and go back to it. But writing is the closest thing. And I really kind of put myself in that time period. And it's amazing how fast things go. And I've witnessed it myself in the music and in music in my personal life, watching my children grow and things like that. But that folk rock era was such a blip on the radar. And we take that for granted because we listen to the radio and we hear Monday, or The Lovin' Spoonful, Summer in the City, or Mr. Tambourine Man by the Byrds, and we just think it was always there, and it was there for years, and it was there after. It was fast, and the trends change, especially at that. I mean, they change all the time now, but even back then, they were changing at light speed. It gave me an appreciation for really that whole era of music a little bit more. And it's an era that I've always appreciated, but really an appreciation for how fast things really went. I mean, when you think of the Mamas and the Papas, they were together like maybe a little bit. I mean, as the Mamas and Papas recording artists, they were together for like less than 3 years, and probably had about a dozen hits. I don't know the exact number at the moment, but and that's pretty extraordinary. I mean, if you get one hit, you're counting your blessings. But to have that many hits in that short a period of time is quite a feat. And it also makes you think like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and groups like that who had dozens upon dozens of hits. I think the Beatles had like 40 top 10 hits or 40 top 40 hits or something like that. And the Rolling Stones, they were right there along with them, and they're still going, they're still rolling.
Yeah, which is absolutely amazing as well. Also too, when you think about it, oftentimes when you have groups that come together like this, we talk about the emotional involvement and the relationships and all the rest. And you see that sometimes even with other groups too, where that has torn them apart, or they've broken up, and then they regroup again, and they break up again, and they regroup. You've heard that between Steven Tyler and Joe Perry on Aerosmith, and just a lot of different scenarios where there is ego or competition, or and that's quite amazing too. It surprises a lot of people when they hear the backstories later on.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with the Eagles. I mean, they're in their farewell tour right now, and it's amazing that I was quite frankly, as far as they're concerned, I was after Glenn Fry passed away, I was quite surprised they went on.
And even continued.
Yeah. But and you want to talk about egos, man. I mean, that is the big case number one as far as groups with monstrous egos. But and unfortunately, that really wasn't the way it ended up for the Mamas and the Papas. They never really formally broke up. They made that fourth album. It came out in '68. Wasn't that well received. It's a pleasant album. It's not great. In 1968, after the Monterey Pop Festival, and with the rise of power trios like Cream and the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and then you had groups like the Who coming on, and the Rolling Stones changing their sound up to be a little more heavy, to be heavier, and the Beatles too. It was kind of hard to be a singing quartet in that whole sphere of groups. And you see it, like even the Beach Boys and the Four Seasons were known for their harmonies, but they were struggling 68, 69, 70, 71. And the Mamas and the Papas suffered as well. And really, after the Monterey Pop Festival on, like you said in the beginning, that really kind of it was John's baby, but it really kind of killed them, because after that, people wanted rock and roll. They weren't looking for singing, for harmony. And eventually that came back. You had the oldies revival in the early '70s, and the Beach Boys came back, and Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons.
Judy Collins going strong.
Yeah, and then you had the Mamas and the Papas. They got back together. They recorded a final album because they were going to get sued by the record company if they hadn't. It was a contractual obligation, and then they went their separate ways. And unfortunately, Cass passed away in 1974, and that really ended it. And then and like we said before, how they're not, how I told you, they're not really interchangeable parts. They're a shared experience. But that didn't stop in the '80s. John Phillips trying to do that, reforming the Mamas and the Papas. Didn't have Michelle. Had Denny for a little while. Couldn't have Cass. Replaced her with Spanky McFarlane from Spanky and Our Gang, who sounded kind of like Cass a little bit, but not really. She had a strong voice. It just didn't really work. And then after that, Denny left, and it was John and Scott. He was always replacing people, and it really kind of became a joke. But it's tough to survive that. And you have those egos, and then when you lose somebody like Cass, it's kind of like, I liken it to the Cars, the group the Cars. I love the Cars, but like, who would ever go see a revamped version of the Cars with Rick Ocasek and Benjamin Orr gone? Both of the singers.
Right.
So it's when you lose those pieces, it's irreplaceable.
There are a lot of tribute bands out there. You're hearing a lot of different tribute bands now, mimicking the sounds and the look of some of the iconic groups. How do you feel about that? And do you know of any who have done that with the Mamas and the Papas? I can't think of any myself.
There is one out there. In fact, one of my PR reps had looked to try to book them for my book launch party, but they're in Las Vegas, and we just didn't have enough time to, it was very put together very quickly. But there is a tribute group out to them, and and I listened to them, and they sounded okay, but they're not going to make you forget the Mamas and the Papas. There are really good tribute groups out there, though. Like I'm a big fan of the Peter Gabriel era Genesis, and like that era of Genesis is extinct. It's never coming back in a million years. You can't. Guys are all friendly. They love each other, but for some reason they're just very weird about reuniting. And there's this group out there called the Musical Box. Since the early '90s, have been really recreating early Genesis concerts, which were very unique. I mean, Peter Gabriel would dress in these elaborate costumes and tell all these dirty stories before songs, and they do it very, very well. So it can be done.
It's amazing because, like you say, some of the groups, they're pretty good, and if you close your eyes, you think you're listening to them. Some of the Pink Floyd tribute group, I've interviewed a few of them on television, and some of them are, they really work painstakingly to mimic the sound, but of course it's not the same. Australian Pink Floyd and Brit Floyd are pretty much, there's that whole pyrotechnic thing, and they really get into the whole, I guess, feeling of what it was like to have gone to a Pink Floyd concert, which you'll never be able to do again. To try to just recreate that feeling, but that has, again, a lot of the visuals involved in it.
Well, and I like that because that's like I said with Genesis, that's extinct. It's never coming back. It's like there's a lot of Beatles tribute bands. There's the Fab Four and a few others. Rain is another one, and they do great jobs. And the Beatles are never going. They can't tour again. It's impossible. And I think to preserve that music for others, that's awesome. But there are people out there. I don't think you can, like Bruce Springsteen is such a workaholic and a powerhouse when it comes to live performing that I don't think any tribute band could ever even come close to mimicking that, But I like to see a Buddy Holly tribute act. That's things that you just can't see again. That's really
brothers.
Yeah, the Righteous Brothers. You can duplicate that. There's a lot of groups out there that tried to sound like them. A lot of singing duos back in those days. Yeah, it's just the Temptations or the Four Tops or the Supremes, anything Motown like that. That's just impossible to get back together. I celebrate that because it keeps the music going.
Exactly right. Who is the reader? Who do you see this book for? Is it just somebody of the time period, somebody who was a super fan of the group? Did you have a reader in mind, or is it really for anybody?
I wanted to write a book that I would read in a style that I would read. And I think I tried to write it for everybody. You don't have to necessarily be a fan of the group or know the era. I know my wife doesn't know too much about that era, and she enjoyed the book. She said it was a page turner, but there were times where she would have to talked about, and I try to do a fairly good job, and I think I do a fairly good job of explaining who everybody is and doing backstories and everything like that. So I think it's for anybody who likes the music of that era, who likes anything 50s and 1960s related. If you're a fan, if you like history, I think you'll enjoy the book. If you're a Mamas and the Papas fan, if you're a Beatles fan, there's great stories about them and the Beatles. If you're a Dylan fan, the Mamas and the Papas, really intersected with all the big players of that time period: the Grateful Dead, the Stones, Janis Joplin. They're all in there. So I think if you're a fan of 1960s music, or just the 1960s in general, you'll enjoy it.
The book available at Amazon, right? Is it also Barnes and Noble? Are there other places where people can get the book?
Yeah, it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, anywhere fine books are sold. You can grab yourself a copy. In fact, I believe the audio version just dropped today. So if you're not a reader and thank you. You want to listen to it in the car,
Did you do the audiobook?
I did not. They hired an actor. So
isn't that something? Yeah, that's an interesting way that it's done. Yeah.
Yeah, really. I don't know if I have the projection that an actor does, but it's probably better because he could probably do it. But I haven't heard it yet, and I am actually very interested in hearing what it sounds like. It's weird to have somebody read what you wrote.
Now, when they're doing that, are you in with them saying, no, really punch this word, or they're doing all that?
I wasn't even notified. I found out a couple of weeks ago. I looked on the Amazon listing and I saw the audio book, and I was like,
yeah,
yeah, okay. Well, I guess this is coming out. Okay, good deal.
People, pop it in the box or in the car or whatever.
Yeah. If I write a couple more books and I get a little more clout, then I might say, listen, I want to be involved.
I want to be the one. I wrote that. That's my baby. The cover is fantastic, and we're talking about all the leaves are brown. And how'd you come up with the cover design?
Actually, the book company, the publisher, came up with the cover design. They gave me a couple. I rejected the first few, and then they brought me this one, and I sat and looked at it, and they had a few different options, and I liked the green and the brown. I thought that really highlighted. In fact, that cover, I found out from Pat LaCroix, Denny's former bandmate, that was taken at Denny's home, which was formerly owned by silent movie star Mary Astor. Oh, yeah. And that is the side of a hill that's covered in ivy that they took that photograph. And I love it. I came up with the title, and it's funny because everything Mamas and Papas related is titled California Dreamin', and I was like, I don't want it to be titled California Dreamin'. It will get lost in the mix. It's been used to death. And I thought All the Leaves Are Brown really kind of sums up the group, and it does invoke California Dreamin', because everybody, even my publicist at the book company, she's in her 20s, and she's like, I don't know the Mamas and the Papas, but I know that song.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, the music's iconic. You still hear it today, and it's still, it makes you feel good. There's just something about all of the music that they penned that it resonates with people even today from all different generations. Like you say, somebody that's younger who can hear it and say, I like that song.
Yeah.
Did you learn anything as far as how much control they had in creating the music itself? A lot of times when groups come together, even if they're friends first and they come together, once you get involved with other people and entities, the group itself then is rebranded or told what to do, what to sing, what not to sing. How much control did they have during that process?
Well, I think John Phillips was a force of nature in the studio, and Lou Adler picked up on that, and I think he really appreciated John and really let John kind of guide the thing. I think Lou Adler was a very hands-on producer, a real musician's producer. I mean, he chewed up and spit out plenty in his time, but he also had a deep appreciation for really great ones. He loved Jan Barry, of Jan and Dean, and he was a great arranger. And he worked with Sam Cooke, and I think he saw a lot of that in John, and really kind of gave him reign and worked with him, because Lou was a good arranger, a good studio guy in his own right, kind of of the Phil Spector kind of mold, and was able to anticipate the trends and ride the trends that were coming or that were there. And I think he really appreciated that in John, and let him kind of have his way in the studio.
Which
The other three, not so much. Yeah, John really kind of took over, directed the other three. It was, it's kind of like the Beach Boys. It was Brian Wilson, and the other guys would come in and sing.
Exactly right. Here's the book title again. It really is rich with incredible stories and lots of archival information, folks. I think you're going to be very impressed. It's All the Leaves Are Brown. We're talking to the author. His very first book, Scott Shea, and we expect more from him. And we'll have you on when you finish the Waylon Jennings and work on some of the others. I think he came up with some cool ideas even today in the conversation about people that need to be talked about and highlighted, which is really, really cool. Do you see any of this? Like, would you love to see a book like this come to video?
Oh, yeah. In fact, the movie rights for All the Leaves Are Brown have already been purchased. Lisa Saltzman, who's a movie producer, is shopping it around either for a biopic or like a limited edition series, which I think the latter is a better option. That's kind of what is really hot these days, and I think the Mamas and the Papas have a good story. There was that I think it's called Daisy Jones and the Six, which was based off of Fleetwood Mac, and the Mamas and the Papas are Fleetwood Mac before Fleetwood Mac. So I think there's definitely, between their early days and their folk music era and coming together in the Virgin Islands and riding to Los Angeles, and then the subsequent fame and the breakup, I think there's enough to fill 2 seasons of, like 8 or 9 45-minute episodes like you see on Netflix or Amazon Prime or all these other places. I think this is just ideal for it.
Well, congratulations on all of it. I know it's been a labor of love, and it's an intense process to write a book, and also going through the whole publishing process, getting it out there, letting people know about it. And I wish you nothing but continued success, and encourage folks to get the book again, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the other great places where you find fine books. Scott G. Shea is here. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, or you grew up in New Jersey?
I grew up in New Jersey. I live in Pennsylvania now, but I'm in Bucks County, which is right on the Jersey border. So I can see New Jersey from my front yard.
Or Phillies?
Well, I grew up a Yankees fan. I would say I'm a Phillies fan right now, but I went to Alabama for college, so Alabama football really consumes me. There's not a lot of room for anything else.
I grew up out east on Long Island, and my father always a Brooklyn Dodger fan. So of course, the transition that was natural was the Mets. And I just asked, as far as Yankees, Mets with a last name like Shea.
Yeah.
Probably as a kid, you would have been able to get in there for free. I'm the son of Mr. Shea.
It was my namesake, and it's spelled the same way, so people knew how to pronounce my last name. I
still call it that. I still say, I know it's Citi Field, but I know a lot of people still say we're going to Shea. It's part of yeah.
It was heartbreaking for me when they changed it.
I wish that they had kept it and maybe used it for other purposes, either from a museum point of view, or perhaps maybe for minor league or high schools, or just for entertainment, whatever. Just kept that there and built Citi Field, but I guess maybe there wasn't enough land available.
There's such a need for real estate in that area, and it's such a high dollar thing. I can't imagine them preserving it.
Yeah, and it was also tied into the whole World's Fair time period when it was built, with Robert Moses and the whole World's Fair back around that time. This was really fantastic. And matter of fact, Kathleen works for the New York Mets. She misses Shea Stadium. She's a longtime friend and viewer of our show. And she thanks for being here as well. And Sherry's all excited. She loves the Mamas and the Papas. She's going to want to get the book as well. Kathleen's going to want to grab the book. So this is really Cool
Awesome.
stuff. Yeah, cool stuff. This was great. Congratulations again, and spread the word about our show. If you'd like to come back, other folks you think would like to pop on. Like I said, it's conversational and free flowing. We don't do scripted questions, and we get to the heart of the matter, and we bring the viewers in. They've been commenting throughout, the viewers, and this will be archived on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, for all to see later on as well. Thanks, Scott, for being with us. We really appreciate all the time, and congratulations again on All the Leaves Are Brown. I know it's really exciting. You're in a sweet spot right now. It's quite exciting.
It is, Jim. I really appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Absolutely. We'll see you again soon, okay?
Absolutely.
You be well. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Talking the mamas and the papas and so much more with Scott G. Shea. He's the author of this incredible new book, All the Leaves Are Brown, which we had mentioned earlier, and really talking about how the mamas and the papas came together and how they eventually broke apart. And happens a lot of times with many groups, but this particular group has had such a unique story, and maybe you've been a longtime fan, and some of what we talked about today on the Jim Masters Show live series, you didn't know about. You just knew about their music. You just knew about them being entertainers and performers and celebrities in the music world. And now you got a chance to take a little bit deeper dive to learn about some of the intermingling, the relationships, the production of the music, and what really it took. And of course, some of the people involved, the players, the dynamics of personality. Maybe you didn't know that John didn't necessarily want Cass to be in the group. Really cool stuff. There it is. All the Leaves Are Brown, and it's a really good book. Yeah, again, you can pick it up at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. And just type it in, Google it. It'll come right up as well for you. This was fascinating. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for all the comments. Thanks for all the interactivity. And thanks to our very special guest again, Scott Shea, joining us from his home in Pennsylvania. As I mentioned, in addition to being a great author, with his first book now, he is a prolific writer and a longtime producer, and on SiriusXM and elsewhere. And so you'll hear more from him, I'm sure. We really appreciate you stopping by the show. If you enjoyed this episode, gang, here's something. We'll give you a little homework here. Do give this episode a thumbs up, a like. There's a thumbs up icon that's actually on our YouTube channel. Looks like that. Big thumbs up. Leave a comment. Interact with us as well. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. It does take a village. You can also see almost 1,000 episodes of our series, which is quite amazing. There's almost about 1,000 episodes of our series that are available for your enjoyment. So enjoy all that. And binge watch. If you like to binge watch, you can binge watch hours and hours of our series. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We don't say goodbye. We say see you later. Ciao, cheers. Hasta la vista. We say moi loop, slancha, cheerio, be well, take care, and all the rest. For all of us here at Jim Masters, thanking you for your time, this time till next time here on the Jim Masters Show live series. Thanks for all the great comments, seeing them coming in here, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for being with us. Take care.